The rumble of Jake Morrison's Harley cut through the midnight silence as he pulled into the gravel lot of Murphy's Bar. After 18 hours on the road, his weathered hands ached for rest and his throat burned for whiskey. At 62, the former army sergeant had learned to listen to his body's warnings. The neon sign flickered against the darkness, casting red shadows across his lined face as he killed the engine. But something was wrong. Muffled screams echoed from the alley behind the bar, followed by the sickening sound of flesh meeting bone. Jake's military instincts kicked in instantly. He'd heard those sounds before in places most people couldn't imagine. Without hesitation, he moved toward the darkness, his steel-toed boots crunching on broken glass. What he discovered in that alley would change everything he thought he knew about justice and second chances. But would saving her life cost him his own? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake's dog tags clinked softly against his chest beneath the worn leather jacket as he stepped into the narrow alley. The patches on his jacket, 82nd Airborne, Afghanistan Campaign, Iraq Service, told a story most people would never understand. Tonight, they felt heavier than usual. The scene before him painted itself in stark black and white. 4 men surrounded a young woman who had curled into a defensive ball against the brick wall. Her dark hair was matted with blood, her clothes torn. One man held a baseball bat, another wielded brass knuckles that caught the pale light from the street lamp. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the men's cruel laughter. "I don't know what you're talking about." The largest man, wearing a Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots, spat on the ground. "Marcus says you've been running long enough, sweetheart. Time to come home." Jake had seen enough. In his 30 years of military service, he'd learned to assess threats quickly. These weren't hardened soldiers. They were bullies who relied on intimidation and overwhelming force against defenseless targets. That made them predictable. "Gentlemen," Jake's voice cut through the night like a blade. All 4 men turned, surprised by the interruption. "I think the lady has made her position clear." The man with the bat stepped forward, sizing up the older stranger. Jake's silver hair caught the light, his lined face showing every one of his 62 years. To these young thugs, he probably looked like an easy target. "Walk away, old man," the leader growled. "This doesn't concern you." Jake's hands remained loose at his sides, his posture deceptively relaxed. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous fighters rarely looked the part. "I'm afraid I can't do that." The woman, Sarah, though he didn't know her name yet, looked up with desperate hope flickering in her dark eyes. She was younger than his daughter Emma, maybe 28 or 30. Even through the blood and bruises, Jake could see intelligence there and a strength that hadn't been broken, despite whatever she'd endured. "You sure about this, Gramps?" The man with brass knuckles cracked his neck theatrically. "We're not playing games here?" Jake's mind automatically catalogued the tactical situation. 4 opponents, armed but undisciplined. The alley provided limited maneuvering room, but also prevented them from surrounding him effectively. The woman was injured but conscious, not a liability he'd need to protect while fighting. "Neither am I," Jake replied quietly. The first attacker came fast, but telegraphed his punch from 3 feet away. Jake sidestepped, caught the man's wrist, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the brick wall. The brass knuckles clattered to the ground as the man slumped unconscious. The second man swung the baseball bat in a wide arc. Jake ducked under it, stepped inside the man's reach, and delivered a precise elbow strike to his solar plexus. As the attacker doubled over, gasping, Jake relieved him of the bat with a simple wrist manipulation he'd taught to countless soldiers. "Still want to do this?" Jake asked the remaining 2 men, who now looked considerably less confident. The leader pulled a knife, a cheap switchblade that would have made Jake's old drill sergeant laugh. "You think you're some kind of hero, old man?" "No," Jake said, advancing slowly. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." The knife wielder lunged forward in desperation. Jake caught his wrist, twisted, and applied pressure to the nerve cluster near the elbow. The knife fell harmlessly as the man cried out in pain. A swift uppercut ended his participation in the evening's activities. The fourth man, clearly the smartest of the group, raised his hands in surrender. "Hey, look, you were just leaving," Jake finished. "All of you. And if I see any of you near this lady again, our next conversation won't be so polite." As the conscious attackers helped their fallen comrades retreat into the night, Jake knelt beside the young woman. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries: a split lip, bruised cheek, and cuts on her arms where she'd tried to defend herself. "It's all right now," he said gently, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to calming frightened people in dangerous situations. "I'm Jake. What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, then winced as she tried to sit up straighter. "Thank you. I thought they were going to kill me." Jake helped her to her feet, noting how she favored her left side, probably bruised ribs. "What did they want?" "Who's Marcus?" Fear flashed across her face again. "I can't. It's complicated. You shouldn't have gotten involved. They'll come back with more people." "Let me worry about that," Jake said. "Right now you need medical attention. There's a first aid kit in my bike, and Murphy's Bar has a back room where you can clean up safely." As they walked slowly toward the parking lot, Sarah clutched a torn photograph she'd somehow managed to keep during the attack. Jake caught a glimpse of a family, parents, children, everyone smiling. The photo told a story of innocence lost, of a life interrupted by violence. Jake's military training had taught him to recognize when someone was running from more than just local trouble. Sarah's eyes held the same haunted look he'd seen in refugee camps and war zones, the expression of someone whose entire world had been upended by forces beyond their control. Whatever storm had brought this young woman to a back alley, beating in the middle of nowhere. Jake Morrison was about to find himself right in the center of it. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched the torn photograph, a family portrait showing happier times before her world collapsed. The image was creased and stained now, but she refused to let it go. It was all she had left of the life she'd been forced to abandon 6 months ago. Jake guided her toward Murphy's Bar, his weathered hand steady on her elbow. The neon sign cast an eerie glow across the empty parking lot, and Sarah could see his Harley-Davidson parked beneath a flickering streetlight. The motorcycle looked as battle-worn as its owner, chrome dulled by countless miles, leather seat cracked from years of use. "How long have you been running?" Jake asked quietly as they approached the bar's back entrance. His voice carried no judgment, only the careful concern of someone who understood survival. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep her secrets, to protect this stranger who'd already risked enough for her. But something in his steady grey eyes reminded her of her father, a man who'd never broken a promise in his life. 6 months, she whispered. "Ever since I saw him kill Detective Martinez." Jake stopped walking. "Detective Martinez? You witnessed a police officer's murder?" "He wasn't dirty," Sarah said quickly, seeing the assumption forming in Jake's expression. "He was trying to help me. Marcus found out and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The memory of that night still woke her up screaming. Jake studied her face in the dim light. Sarah Chen had the kind of natural beauty that couldn't be hidden by bruises and exhaustion. Her dark eyes held intelligence and compassion, but also a deep well of pain that spoke of trauma beyond tonight's beating. She was probably 28, maybe 30, young enough to be his daughter Emma. "Marcus Volkov," Sarah continued, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. "He's Russian mob, but he operates through legitimate businesses. Import-export, construction, waste management. The perfect cover for money laundering and human trafficking." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He'd encountered men like Volkov during his deployments overseas. Predators who used violence as casually as other people used words. They were the kind of enemy that never stopped hunting, never forgot a grudge. "What did you see?" he asked. Sarah closed her eyes, the memory playing behind her eyelids like a nightmare she couldn't escape. "Marcus thought I was asleep. Detective Martinez came to our apartment, Marcus's apartment, to arrest him. He had evidence, photographs, witness statements. But Marcus was ready for him. She touched her throat unconsciously, remembering how Marcus had strangled the detective with his bare hands while she watched through a crack in the bedroom door. Martinez never had a chance. Marcus made it look like a drug deal gone wrong, planted evidence. The newspaper said Martinez was corrupt, that he'd been taking bribes. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd served with good cops overseas, men and women who risked everything to protect the innocent. The idea of a hero's reputation being destroyed posthumously filled him with quiet rage. Why? "Didn't you go to the FBI?" he asked. "I tried," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "But Marcus has connections everywhere. Police, judges, federal agents. When I finally found someone I thought I could trust, Agent Williams, Marcus got to him first. Williams called me and told me to run, said they'd found a leak in the FBI field office. Jake processed this information with the analytical mind of a career soldier. Sarah wasn't just running from an abusive boyfriend. She was the key witness who could bring down a major criminal organization. That made her invaluable to law enforcement and extremely dangerous to Marcus Volkov. "So you've been moving ever since," Jake said. "Staying ahead of his hunters. I thought I'd lost them in Colorado," Sarah admitted. "I've been working as a waitress under a fake name, trying to save enough money to disappear completely. But they found me somehow. They always find me." Jake looked at the torn photograph in her hands, a family Christmas scene with parents, siblings, children gathered around a tree. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their daughter and sister was running for her life. "Your family," he said. "Do they know?" Sarah shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I can't contact them. Marcus threatened to kill my nephew. He's only 8 years old. As long as I stay away, keep running, my family stays safe." The weight of her isolation hit Jake like a physical blow. This young woman had sacrificed everything, her career, her relationships, her identity, to protect the people she loved. She was a nurse, he realized, seeing the professional way she'd assessed her own injuries. Someone whose life had been dedicated to healing others, now forced to live as a fugitive. "What's your real name?" Jake asked gently. "Sarah Chen," she said. "I was an ER nurse at Seattle General Hospital before everything changed." Jake nodded slowly, understanding more than she knew about having your life redefined by violence. "Well, Sarah Chen, you're not running alone anymore. At least not tonight." As they reached the bar's back door, Sarah looked up at this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she'd stopped believing would be heard. Jake Morrison was clearly a man who'd seen his share of battles, but his eyes held a kindness that Marcus had tried to beat out of the world. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Jake's hand paused on the door handle. "Because someone needs to." Jake's cell phone buzzed insistently in his jacket pocket as he pushed open the back door to Murphy's bar. The screen showed 5 missed calls from Emma, his daughter. Each notification felt like a small weight added to his chest, reminding him of the life he'd been trying to rebuild since his retirement from the army 6 months ago. The bar's interior was dimly lit and smelled of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. Despite the no-smoking laws, a handful of late-night regulars nursed their drinks at the far end, their weathered faces telling stories of hard lives and harder choices. Behind the bar, Tom Murphy wiped down glasses with the mechanical precision of a man who'd been performing the same ritual for 30 years. Tom looked up as Jake and Sarah entered, his eyes immediately assessing the situation with the sharp awareness of a combat veteran. At 68, Tom carried himself with the straight-backed dignity of a Marine who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam before returning home to build something meaningful from the wreckage of war. "Jake Morrison," Tom said, setting down his dish rag. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Didn't expect to be back," Jake replied, helping Sarah to a bar stool. "Tom, this is Sarah. She needs somewhere safe to clean up and think." Tom's gaze took in Sarah's injuries with professional detachment, but Jake caught the flash of anger in the older man's eyes. "Bathroom's through that door, miss. There's a first aid kit under the sink and clean towels in the cabinet." Sarah hesitated, looking between the 2 men. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone else." Trouble's already here, Tom said matter-of-factly. Question is whether we face it together or let it pick us off one by one. While Sarah went to tend her wounds, Tom poured Jake a whiskey without being asked. Those boys who did this to her, they local. They mentioned someone named Marcus, Jake said, accepting the drink. Russian, from what Sarah tells me. Connected. Tom's expression darkened. Markus Volkov. I've heard whispers about him from some of the truckers who come through. Bad news, that one. Word is he's got Sheriff Dawson in his pocket, along with half the county commissioners. Jake's phone buzzed again. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and this time he couldn't ignore it. His daughter was a social worker in Portland, dedicated to helping troubled kids, and she worried about his adjustment to civilian life. Dad. Emma's voice carried relief and frustration in equal measure. I've been calling for hours. Where are you? I'm fine, sweetheart, Jake said, stepping away from the bar for privacy. Just stopped for the night at a place called Murphy's Bar. Road got a little rough. Dad, you can't just disappear like this. I know you need space, but after Mom died, you're all I have left. When you don't answer... Jake closed his eyes, hearing the fear beneath his daughter's words. Linda's death from cancer 2 years ago had shattered both their worlds. But Emma had thrown herself into her work, while Jake had retreated into solitude. The retirement ceremony that should have celebrated 30 years of distinguished service had felt like a funeral for the only identity he'd ever known. I'm sorry, Em. I should have called. I'm just working through some things. Are you drinking? Emma asked quietly. Jake looked at the untouched whiskey on the bar. Not yet. Promise me you'll call tomorrow, okay? And maybe start thinking about coming home for Christmas. It's only 6 weeks away, and I hate the thought of you spending it alone on the road. I'll call tomorrow, Jake promised, not ready to commit to anything beyond the next 24 hours. As he hung up, Sarah emerged from the bathroom, looking cleaner but still fragile. She'd washed the blood from her face and hands, revealing the extent of her bruises. Someone had hurt her systematically, professionally. Your daughter? Sarah asked, having overheard part of the conversation. Emma, she's a good kid, but she worries too much about her old man. Tom refilled Sarah's water glass and pushed a plate of leftover sandwiches toward her. When's the last time you ate something? Sarah couldn't remember. The past few days had been a blur of bus stations and cheap motels, always moving, always looking over her shoulder. This morning, maybe yesterday. Marcus's people, Tom said, addressing Jake. They'll be back, probably with reinforcements and better weapons. This place isn't exactly defensible. Jake studied the bar's layout with tactical eyes. Too many windows, too many entrances, no cover worth mentioning. You have somewhere else you can go tonight, Tom? I've got a camper out back, but I'm not abandoning my bar. Built this place with my own hands after I came back from the war. It's not much, but it's mine. Sarah looked between the two men, seeing the stubborn loyalty that connected veterans across generations. I should leave. I've already put both of you in danger just by being here. Where would you go? Jake asked. You said yourself they always find you. There's an FBI agent in Denver, Sarah said quietly. Agent Torres. She worked with Detective Martinez before he was killed. If I can reach her, that's 300 miles through mountain roads, Tom pointed out. And if Marcus has people watching the highways... Jake's mind was already working through the tactical problem. Sarah needed to reach Denver, but traveling alone made her vulnerable. The smart play would be to escort her personally, but that meant abandoning his plan to spend the winter riding aimlessly through the Southwest. Trying to figure out what came after 30 years of military service, his phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. Love you, Dad. Be safe. Jake looked at Sarah, seeing something in her determined eyes that reminded him why he'd spent 3 decades fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Some battles found you whether you went looking for them or not. We leave in the morning, he said finally. Together. Morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Murphy's Bar as Sarah carefully touched the bruises on her face. The swelling had gone down overnight, but the purple marks around her eye told the story of violence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Her nursing license, hidden in the inner pocket of her purse, felt like a relic from another life. Sarah Chen, RN, Seattle General Hospital. A woman who used to save lives instead of running for her own. Jake found her sitting at the bar, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Tom was already moving around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the efficiency of a man who'd been feeding lost souls for decades. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, settling onto the stool beside her. "Like I've been hit by a truck," Sarah replied honestly. "But I've felt worse." The admission hung in the air between them, revealing more about her recent experiences than any detailed explanation could. Jake had seen enough combat trauma to recognize someone who'd learned to endure pain as a survival mechanism. "Tell me about Detective Martinez," Jake said gently. "How did you meet him?" Sarah's hands wrapped around the coffee mug as if drawing warmth from it. "I was working the night shift at Seattle General when they brought Marcus in. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, nothing life-threatening, but he needed surgery. While I was prepping him, he started talking to me. Charming, you know. Told me he was a businessman, that the shooting was random violence." She paused, remembering how Marcus Volkov had seemed different from the usual criminals who ended up in her trauma bay. Well-dressed, educated, speaking multiple languages with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "He asked me out before they discharged him," Sarah continued. "Flowers, expensive dinners, weekends in Vancouver. I thought I'd met someone successful and sophisticated. I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," Jake said firmly. "You were targeted by a professional predator." Sarah nodded, but Jake could see she still blamed herself. "It took me 3 months to realize what Marcus really was. The phone calls at all hours, the men who came to his apartment speaking Russian, the way restaurant owners would comp our meals and hotel managers would upgrade our rooms without being asked. People were afraid of him." Tom placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of Sarah, along with fresh coffee. "Eat," he said simply. "I can't think clearly on an empty stomach." As Sarah ate, she continued her story. Detective Martinez was investigating a human trafficking ring operating out of the port. Young women from Eastern Europe, brought in on cargo ships and forced into prostitution. Marcus was the middleman, using his import business as cover. Jake felt his jaw tighten. During his deployments overseas, he'd encountered similar operations. Modern slavery disguised as legitimate business. The victims were always young, vulnerable, and completely disposable to men like Marcus. "Martinez needed someone on the inside," Sarah said. "Someone who could get close to Marcus and document his activities. He approached me at the hospital one night after my shift. He asked you to spy on your boyfriend," Jake said, understanding the impossible position Martinez had put her in. "He showed me photographs," Sarah whispered. "Girls who couldn't have been older than 16, locked in shipping containers. Some of them were already dead when they found them. Martinez said Marcus was responsible for at least 30 deaths, maybe more." Sarah pulled out her nursing license, staring at the photo of herself from just 18 months ago. The woman in the picture looked confident, optimistic, ready to heal the world one patient at a time. "I took an oath to do no harm. How could I ignore what Marcus was doing?" "So you helped Martinez build his case," Jake said. "For 2 months I collected evidence. Financial records Marcus left lying around, names and phone numbers, photographs of meetings. I thought I was being careful, but Marcus is paranoid by nature. He has cameras everywhere, monitors all communications." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The night Martinez came to arrest him, I was supposed to be working a double shift at the hospital, but they sent me home early because of a scheduling mix-up. I got back to Marcus's apartment and heard voices. Jake could see her reliving the trauma, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Tom quietly refilled her coffee cup, a small gesture of support that didn't interrupt her narrative. "I hid in the bedroom closet," Sarah continued. "Through the crack in the door, I watched Marcus strangle Detective Martinez with his bare hands. Martinez fought, but Marcus is strong, and he had the element of surprise. The memory played out behind Sarah's eyes like a horror movie she couldn't turn off. After Martinez was dead, Marcus called his lieutenant. They made it look like a drug deal gone wrong, planted cocaine in Martinez's car, put cash in his wallet. The newspapers said he was corrupt, taking bribes from the same criminals he was supposed to arrest. Jake's fists clenched involuntarily. He'd known good cops who died in service, and the idea of their honor being destroyed posthumously filled him with cold rage. "I stayed hidden until Marcus left to dispose of the body," Sarah said. "Then I grabbed whatever I could carry and ran. I've been running ever since." 6 months, Jake said, doing the math. "That's a long time to stay ahead of someone with Marcus's resources. I learned from watching him. Never stay in one place more than a few days. Always pay cash. Change your appearance regularly. Trust no one completely." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Turns out nursing school teaches you a lot about human anatomy and basic medical care, but nothing about being a fugitive." Tom moved closer, his expression serious. "The men who attacked you last night, they weren't local talent. I've seen their type before. Professional muscle, probably flown in from Seattle or Portland, which means Marcus is escalating," Jake said. "He's tired of the chase." Sarah nodded miserably. "Every few weeks they get closer. Better intelligence, more resources. It's only a matter of time before they corner me somewhere I can't run." Jake's phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Morrison, Mr. Morrison." The voice was young, nervous. "This is Deputy Collins with the County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Dawson needs to speak with you about an incident that occurred last night behind Murphy's bar." Jake met Tom's eyes, seeing his own suspicions reflected there. "What kind of incident?" "Assault and battery, sir. We have witnesses who say you were involved in an altercation with 4 men. Sheriff wants to get your statement." "I'll be happy to provide a statement," Jake said carefully. "When would be convenient?" "Right now would be good, sir." "Sheriff's on his way to Murphy's bar. Should be there in about 10 minutes. Jake hung up, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. "We need to leave now." "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, seeing the change in his expression. "Local law enforcement is compromised," Jake said, standing. "Tom, is there a back way out of here?" Tom was already moving toward the rear of the building. "Loading dock behind the kitchen. Leads to the alley where you parked your bike." As they gathered their few belongings, Sarah felt the familiar panic of discovery setting in. "This is what always happens. Every time I think I've found a safe place, Marcus's reach extends further than I imagined." Jake strapped his service revolver to his belt, the weight familiar and reassuring after all these years. "The difference is, this time you're not running alone." Through the front windows, they could see a sheriff's cruiser pulling into the parking lot, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. "Professional wheels for professional killers. They're not here to take statements," Tom observed grimly. Jake looked at Sarah, seeing the fear and exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else, a determination that reminded him of the nurses he'd known in field hospitals overseas. People who refused to give up even when the odds were overwhelming. "Denver's 300 miles, he said. "You still want to try for Agent Torres?" Sarah clutched her nursing license like a talisman. "It's the only chance I have to stop running and start living again." Jake nodded, understanding that some journeys were about more than reaching a destination. Sometimes they were about reclaiming the person you used to be before the world tried to break you. "Then let's go find your life." Jake's service revolver sat heavy in his saddlebag as he and Sarah crouched behind his Harley in the alley behind. Murphy's bar, the weight of the weapon reminded him of countless missions where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Today felt uncomfortably similar to those moments when enemy forces were closing in and extraction seemed impossible. Through the gap between buildings, they could see Sheriff Dawson stepping out of his cruiser, a thick-set man in his 50s whose uniform strained across his belly. Behind him, 3 men emerged from the black SUV. They moved with the fluid coordination of professionals, their eyes constantly scanning for threats and escape routes. "That's Victor," Sarah whispered, pointing to the tallest of the 3 men. "Marcus's lieutenant. If he's here personally, it means they're done playing games." Victor Kozlov looked like Central Casting's idea of a Russian enforcer, 6'4", buzz cut, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. His pale eyes moved across the parking lot with predatory focus. Jake's phone buzzed with another call from Emma. The timing couldn't have been worse, but ignoring his daughter repeatedly would only increase her worry. He answered quietly while keeping watch on the sheriff and his unwelcome guests. "Dad, thank God." Emma's voice carried relief. "I called the bar, but no one answered. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Jake said, watching Victor gesture toward the bar's entrance. "Just had to step outside for some fresh air. You sound strange. Are you in trouble?" Jake closed his eyes, hating the lie, but knowing the truth would only endanger his daughter. "Just tired from the road. Listen, Em, I might be out of cell phone range for a few days. Don't worry if you can't reach me. Dad, what aren't you telling me?" Emma's voice sharpened with the professional instincts of someone trained to recognize when people were hiding something. "You're scaring me. I promise I'll call you in a few days," Jake said. "I love you, kiddo." As he hung up, Sarah was studying his face with the observant eyes of someone who'd learned to read people quickly. "You hate lying to her. She's been through enough," Jake replied. "Lost her mother to cancer. Watched her father struggle with retirement. The last thing she needs is to worry about me getting shot by Russian mobsters." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of protecting family from ugly truths. "I haven't spoken to my parents in 6 months. They think I'm traveling Europe, finding myself after a bad breakup. Every day I don't call them is another lie." Through the building's windows, they could see Sheriff Dawson and Victor entering the bar. Tom would handle them with the stoic competence of a Marine, but eventually they'd search the building. "We need a plan," Jake said, his mind shifting into tactical mode. "Denver's 300 miles through mountain roads. Victor's team will have people watching the highways." Sarah pulled out a crumpled road atlas she'd been carrying since Seattle. "I've been avoiding the main routes. Back roads, Forest Service roads, anything that doesn't show up on GPS." Jake studied the map, his finger tracing potential routes through the Colorado Rockies. "That adds time and risk. Mountain weather can change fast this time of year. Better than walking into an ambush on I-70. Sarah replied. Through the bar's front window, they could see Tom gesturing emphatically while Sheriff Dawson took notes. Victor stood apart from the conversation. His attention focused on something Tom was showing him, probably Jake's registration information from when he'd checked in the night before. "They know who you are now," Sarah said quietly. "Your real name, your background. Once Marcus gets that information, he'll know I'm not just some random good Samaritan," Jake finished. 30 years of military service creates a substantial paper trail. Sarah's medical training kicked in as she noticed Jake favoring his left shoulder, an old injury, probably shrapnel or bullet damage from his army days. "How's your mobility?" "If we have to move fast." "I'm not 25 anymore," Jake admitted, "but I can still handle myself in a fight." A crash from inside the bar made them both freeze. Through the window, they could see Victor overturning tables while his men searched the back rooms. Sheriff Dawson stood by helplessly, his corruption apparently extending only to looking the other way, not participating in active violence. "Tom's buying us time," Jake said, "but not much." Sarah was already swinging her leg over the Harley's passenger seat. "Then we better not waste it." Jake started the engine, the familiar rumble of the V-twin somehow reassuring despite their circumstances. As they prepared to leave the alley, he caught sight of Tom through the window, still standing his ground against Victor's. Intimidation. The old Marine met Jake's eyes through the glass and gave an almost imperceptible nod, the kind of silent communication that passed between warriors who understood sacrifice. Tom would hold the line as long as possible, giving them the head start they needed. "Hold on tight," Jake told Sarah as they pulled out of the alley. "This is going to get rough." Behind them, Victor emerged from the bar empty-handed but far from defeated. His pale eyes tracked the sound of the motorcycle disappearing into the distance, and Sarah could see him reaching for his phone to coordinate the pursuit. The chase had officially begun, and Sarah knew from 6 months of running that Marcus Volkov never gave up once he'd committed to the hunt. But for the first time since Detective Martinez's murder, she wasn't facing the darkness alone. As they accelerated toward the mountain roads, Sarah pressed closer to Jake's solid frame, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Tom Murphy's Purple Heart sat in its place of honor behind the bar, catching the morning light that filtered through Murphy's front windows. The medal had been earned in the jungles of Vietnam when Tom was barely 20 years old. But the lessons it represented about courage and sacrifice had guided him through 45 years of civilian life. Viktor Kozlov studied the medal with the cold appreciation of a man who understood the value of leverage. You were a veteran, yes? Like your friend who just escaped on motorcycle. Tom continued wiping down glasses with steady hands, refusing to be intimidated by the Russians' looming presence. Lots of veterans pass through here. It's that kind of place. This Jake Morrison, Victor said, consulting a small notebook. 30 years United States Army, Sergeant Major, 82nd Airborne Division, multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Very dangerous man. Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably near the bar's entrance, his role as local law enforcement feeling increasingly meaningless as Victor's men systematically searched the building. The corruption that had seemed so profitable when it involved looking the other way for smuggling operations felt like a death sentence. Now that professional killers were operating in his jurisdiction, I wouldn't know about that, Tom replied evenly. He seemed like a decent fellow who helped someone in trouble. Victor smiled, but the expression held no warmth. You know what I think, old soldier? I think you and your friend Jake, you have code. Honor among warriors, yes? This makes you predictable. Through the window, Tom could see Victor's backup team establishing surveillance positions around the bar. Professional work, overlapping fields of fire, clear communication lines, multiple escape routes blocked. These weren't the local thugs who'd attacked Sarah the night before. The woman, Victor continued, she is very important to my employer, worth considerable expense to retrieve safely. But every day she runs, she becomes more dangerous to business operations. Tom set down his dish rag and met Victor's pale eyes directly. Don't know anything about any woman. Victor nodded to one of his men, who promptly swept the contents of the bar top onto the floor with a crash. Bottles shattered, the cash register toppled, and 40 years of accumulated memories scattered across the scarred wooden floor. I respect military service, Victor said conversationally. My grandfather fought at Stalingrad. Brave man, but also practical man. He understood that some battles cannot be won, that survival sometimes requires strategic retreat. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat nervously. Maybe we should shut up, Victor said without looking at him. To Tom, your friend Jake, he thinks he can protect this woman, but he does not understand what he faces. Marcus Volkov has resources across 6 states. Police, federal agents, judges. We will find them. Tom's jaw tightened as he thought about Jake and Sarah racing through mountain roads on an old Harley, pursued by an organization with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. The tactical situation was hopeless from any rational perspective. Here is what will happen, Victor continued. You will call Jake Morrison. Tell him that cooperation now means everyone lives. Continued resistance means everyone dies, including his daughter Emma in Portland. The threat against Jake's daughter crossed a line that transformed Tom's steady calm into cold fury. During his 2 tours in Vietnam, he'd learned to recognize the moment when negotiation ended and violence became inevitable. You made a mistake, Tom said quietly. What mistake is that, old man? Threatening that girl. Tom's hand moved almost casually toward the sawed-off shotgun mounted beneath the bar. See, Jake Morrison isn't the only dangerous veteran in this room. Victor's expression shifted as he reassessed the situation. Tom Murphy was 78 years old, but his eyes held the steady focus of someone who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again if necessary. Sheriff, Victor said, without taking his eyes off Tom, Arrest this man for obstruction of justice." Dawson fumbled for his handcuffs, but his movements were clumsy with fear. "Tom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The only thing hard about this," Tom replied, "is deciding whether you boys are worth the ammunition." Victor's men tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The bar had become a powder keg, with multiple fuses burning toward the same explosive conclusion. "You cannot win this fight," Victor said. "My men are professionals." "So was I," Tom replied. "Difference is, I fought for something bigger than money." The Purple Heart caught the light again, a small reminder of courage under impossible odds. Tom had earned it by holding his position against overwhelming enemy fire, while wounded Marines were evacuated to safety. Today felt remarkably similar. "Last chance, old soldier," Victor said. "Call your friend." Tom's hand closed around the shotgun's grip. "Go to hell." The first shot came from Victor's man near the window, shattering the silence and triggering a firefight that would give Jake and Sarah the precious time they needed to disappear into the mountains. Tom Murphy's final battle had begun, and like his service in Vietnam, it was a fight worth having. As bullets flew and men dove for cover, Tom's last coherent thought was that some things were worth dying for, and protecting the innocent had always been at the top of that list. Sarah's medical bag bounced against her back as Jake's Harley roared through the winding mountain highway. The bag contained the tools of her former life: stethoscope, bandages, emergency medications, instruments of healing that felt foreign after 6 months of running. But as they crested a hill and saw the accident scene spread across the road below, her training kicked in with automatic precision. A minivan had skidded off the wet pavement and rolled into the shallow ravine beside the highway. Steam rose from the crumpled engine, and Sarah could see movement inside the vehicle. Someone was alive but trapped. "Stop!" She called over the wind and engine noise. Jake didn't hesitate, pulling the Harley to a controlled stop near the accident scene. As they dismounted, Sarah was already assessing the situation with the clinical detachment that had made her one of Seattle General's most respected trauma nurses. The minivan lay on its side. Driver's door crumpled against the rocky ground. Through the shattered windshield, Sarah could see a woman in her 30s, conscious but bleeding from a head wound. In the back seat, a child, maybe 7 years old, was crying but appeared uninjured. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Sarah called, approaching the vehicle carefully. "I'm a nurse. We're going to get you out of there." Jake was already surveying the scene with tactical eyes, noting the fresh skid marks and the smell of leaking gasoline. "We need to work fast. This thing could go up." Sarah crawled through the passenger window, her medical bag in hand. Inside the minivan, the driver, a woman named Lisa according to her license, was semi-conscious with obvious signs of concussion. Her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. "Mommy!" The little boy whimpered from his car seat. "Is Mommy okay?" "She's going to be fine, sweetheart," Sarah said with the calm authority she'd perfected in countless emergency situations. "What's your name?" "Tyler," the boy answered. "We were going to see Grandma." Sarah quickly checked Tyler for injuries while assessing his mother's condition. The child was scared but unharmed. His car seat had done its job. Lisa, however, needed immediate medical attention and careful extraction to prevent spinal injury. "Jake," Sarah called, "I need you to stabilize her neck while I check for internal bleeding." Jake positioned himself according to Sarah's instructions, his large hands providing steady support as she worked. Watching her operate, he saw a glimpse of the woman she'd been before Marcus Volkov had turned her life into a nightmare of constant flight. Sarah's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, pupil response, and breathing. Concussion, possible internal bleeding, definitely a broken arm. "We need to get her to a hospital." The sound of approaching engines made them both freeze. Through the trees, Jake could see the distinctive black paint of an SUV moving fast along the highway they'd just traveled. Victor's pursuit team was closing the gap. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. Not looking up from her patient, Jake estimated distances and travel times with military precision. "Maybe 10 minutes before they reach this stretch of road." Sarah's hands never stopped moving as she continued her assessment. Lisa's breathing was shallow, her skin pale and clammy, classic signs of shock setting in. Without immediate treatment, she could die within the hour. "I can't leave her," Sarah said quietly. "If we run now, she dies." Jake understood the impossible choice she was facing. Every instinct told him to get Sarah away from this exposed position before Victor's team arrived. But he'd spent 30 years in service to others, and abandoning a dying woman violated everything he'd sworn to protect. "What do you need?" he asked. Sarah was already opening her medical bag, pulling out IV supplies and emergency medications she'd managed to salvage from her car before fleeing Seattle. "Help me get her out of the car safely. Then we need to flag down someone with a vehicle big enough to transport her." Working together, they carefully extracted Lisa from the wreckage, Jake supporting her head and neck while Sarah monitored for signs of spinal injury. Once they had her on stable ground, Sarah started an IV line with the skill of someone who'd performed the procedure hundreds of times under pressure. Tyler watched wide-eyed as Sarah worked to save his mother, his small face showing the kind of trust that children place in adults who seem to know what they're doing. Jake found himself thinking of Emma at that age, looking to him for protection and guidance. "There," Sarah said, securing the IV line. "That should stabilize her blood pressure until we can get her to proper medical care." A pickup truck appeared around the curve, and Jake stepped into the road, waving his arms. The driver, a rancher in his 60s, pulled over immediately when he saw the accident scene. "Good Lord," the rancher said, jumping out of his truck. "What happened?" "Car accident," Jake explained quickly. "The woman needs immediate medical attention." "Can you take them to the nearest hospital?" "Mercy General is about 20 miles down the mountain," the rancher replied. "Load her in the back." As they carefully transferred Lisa and Tyler to the pickup truck, Sarah pressed her business card into the rancher's hand. "Tell the ER doctor that she has a possible subdural hematoma and needs a CT scan immediately." The rancher nodded, understanding the urgency. As his truck disappeared around the curve toward the hospital, Jake and Sarah were left alone with the smoking wreckage and the approaching sound of Victor's pursuit. "You could have died here," Jake said as they mounted the Harley again. Sarah looked back toward the road where the pickup truck had vanished, carrying a mother and child toward safety. Some things are worth dying for. As they accelerated toward the high mountain passes, Jake realized he was beginning to understand what had made Sarah Chen worth killing for in Marcus Volkov's twisted worldview. She possessed something that couldn't be destroyed by threats or violence, a fundamental commitment to preserving life that made her dangerous to men who dealt in death. Jake's annotated field manual lay open on the rough wooden table as he and Ray Hutchins studied topographical maps by lamplight. The manual, worn from decades of use in combat zones across the globe, contained tactical knowledge that could mean the difference between survival and annihilation in the coming confrontation. Ray's remote cabin sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine trees and granite cliffs, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through 5 miles of wilderness. At 65, Ray had chosen isolation after losing his left leg to an IED in Afghanistan. But his mind remained sharp, and his upper body strength was formidable from years of compensating for his disability. "This is good terrain for defense," Ray said, tracing elevation lines with his finger. "Single approach, clear fields of fire, natural cover." "But if they bring enough firepower—" "They will," Jake said grimly. He'd been monitoring radio chatter on Ray's military-grade scanner, picking up fragments of communication that suggested Victor's team was larger and better equipped than originally estimated. Sarah sat across from them, gently cleaning the cuts on Ray's hands where his prosthetic leg had chafed during their preparations. Her touch was professional but compassionate, the instinctive response of someone trained to heal rather than harm. "You don't have to do this," she told Ray quietly. "This isn't your fight." Ray's weathered face cracked into a smile that held no humor. "Miss, when Jake Morrison calls and says he needs help, that's all the reason I need." We served together in Helmand Province. He saved my life twice, carried me to the medevac chopper after the bomb went off." Jake looked up from his tactical planning, uncomfortable with the praise. "You would have done the same for me." "Maybe," Ray said. "But you're the one who actually did it." Through the cabin's reinforced windows, they could see the first hints of dawn touching the eastern peaks. Victor's team would likely attack at first light, using the sun at their backs to gain tactical advantage. Standard assault doctrine that Jake had employed countless times during his military career. Sarah finished treating Ray's wounds and moved to check Jake's shoulder, which had been bothering him since their escape from Murphy's bar. Her fingers found the scar tissue from an old bullet wound. With the practiced touch of someone who understood trauma injuries. "This happened overseas?" she asked. "Fallujah, 2006, Jake replied, not looking up from his maps. "Sniper round caught me during a rooftop patrol. Medics said I was lucky it missed the major arteries." Sarah's hands continued their assessment, feeling for signs of inflammation or restricted movement. "You've been favoring it since yesterday. The stress is causing muscle tension around the scar tissue." "I'll live," Jake said, but he didn't pull away from her touch. "That's the plan," Sarah replied, with a slight smile that transformed her bruised face. Ray watched their interaction with the knowing eyes of someone who'd seen many partnerships forged under fire. There was something developing between Jake and Sarah that went beyond mutual survival. A connection built on shared values and complementary strengths. "Jake," Ray said, "tell me about this Marcus character. What kind of resources are we really facing?" Jake closed the field manual and met his old friend's eyes. Russian mob with connections across 6 states. Corrupt law enforcement, federal agents on the payroll, unlimited financing. Viktor Kozlov is his lieutenant, former Spetsnaz, probably responsible for 30 or 40 kills. "And Sarah here is the key witness who can bring down the whole operation," Ray said. "Understanding the stakes." Sarah nodded, pulling Detective Martinez's case files from her bag. "I have copies of financial records, surveillance photos, witness statements. Enough evidence to prosecute Marcus and his entire network for human trafficking, murder, and racketeering." Ray studied the documents with growing anger. The photographs showed young women, some barely teenagers, in various stages of captivity and abuse. The financial records revealed millions of dollars in blood money flowing through legitimate businesses. "How many girls?" Ray asked quietly. "At least 50 in the past 2 years, Sarah replied. "Maybe more. Marcus treats them like inventory, replaceable, disposable." Jake's jaw tightened as he thought about Emma, safe in Portland but living in a world where predators like Marcus operated with impunity. "This ends here." "Jake," Sarah said, touching his arm, "I need you to understand something. Marcus didn't just kill Detective Martinez. He made me watch, made sure. I knew what happens to people who cross him. He's been hunting me for 6 months, not just to silence me, but to make an example." Ray nodded grimly. "Psychological warfare. Make the enemy so afraid that resistance becomes unthinkable." "But it didn't work," Jake observed, seeing the steel in Sarah's eyes. "You kept running, kept fighting, because I remember what Detective Martinez told me," Sarah said. "Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Those girls in the photographs deserve justice, and I'm the only one who can give it to them." Ray reached for his combat knife, a Vietnam-era weapon that had seen more battles than most soldiers. The blade was still sharp, the grip worn smooth by decades of use. "Then we better make sure you live long enough to testify." Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the mountain valley. Victor had found them, and the final confrontation was about to begin. But for the first time since fleeing Seattle, Sarah felt something other than fear. Surrounded by warriors who understood the meaning of sacrifice, she was ready to stop running and start fighting back. Ray's ham radio crackled to life as veteran voices from across 3 states responded to Jake's coded distress call. The military-grade communication equipment, installed when Ray had first retreated to his mountain sanctuary, now served as a lifeline connecting isolated warriors who still answered the call when brothers were in danger. Charlie 6. "This is Phoenix Base," came a gravelly voice from Arizona. "Confirming your coordinates. We have eyes on 2 black SUVs heading north on Forest Service Road 247. Jake keyed the microphone with practiced efficiency. "Phoenix Base, this is Charlie 6. How many hostiles?" "Estimate 12 to 15 personnel, professional-grade weapons and equipment. They're moving like they know the terrain." Sarah sat beside Jake at the radio console, her hands trembling slightly as she realized the scope of the forces arrayed against them. Through the cabin's reinforced windows, dawn was breaking across the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of red that seemed ominous under the circumstances. "Jake," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something I should have said earlier." He looked at her, noting the strain in her voice. 6 months of running had taken its toll, but there was something else, a deeper fear that went beyond physical danger. "I called the FBI field office in Denver yesterday," Sarah continued. "Before we left Murphy's bar, I tried to reach Agent Torres." Jake's hand paused on the radio controls. "What did you find out?" "The number's been disconnected. Agent Torres hasn't reported for duty in 3 weeks. Sarah's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Either she's dead or Marcus got to her too." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If their contact in Denver was compromised, Sarah's plan to reach federal protection had just evaporated. They were truly on their own against an enemy with resources that seemed to extend everywhere. Ray rolled his wheelchair closer to the radio, his weathered face grim. "How many people has this Marcus bastard killed?" "Detective Martinez was just the beginning," Sarah replied. "Agent Williams in Seattle, probably Agent Torres now. Anyone who tries to help me ends up dead." Jake felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. As a sergeant major, he'd been responsible for keeping soldiers alive in impossible situations. Now he faced the same challenge with higher personal stakes: Sarah's life, Ray's life, and the lives of countless victims who would never see justice if Marcus's organization continued to operate. "Charlie 6, this is Mountain Home," another voice crackled over the radio. "Former Marine sniper team, Idaho National Guard. We can be in position for overwatch in 4 hours. "Negative, Mountain Home," Jake replied immediately. "This is our fight. Maintain safe distance and provide intelligence only." Sarah touched his arm, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You can't protect everyone, Jake, just like I couldn't save Detective Martinez." "Watch me," Jake said with quiet intensity. The radio erupted with more voices as veterans across the region checked in. Artillery specialists from Fort Carson, combat engineers from the Air Force Academy, Navy SEALs from San Diego. Within minutes, Jake had intelligence assets and potential backup spanning half the western United States. But he also had something more personal at stake. His phone showed another missed call from Emma, followed by a text message. "Dad, I'm worried about you. Please call me back." Sarah saw his expression change as he read the message. "You're thinking about your daughter." "Emma's all I have left," Jake admitted. "After Linda died, Emma and we've been trying to figure out how to be a family again. This morning might be the last chance I have to tell her I love her. Then call her," Sarah said simply. Jake looked at the tactical situation, enemy forces closing in, defensive positions still being prepared, coordination with intelligence assets ongoing. Every military protocol said this was the worst possible time for personal communications. "It's not that simple," he said. "Yes, it is." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who'd watched too many people die with words left unspoken. "Call your daughter, Jake. Tell her you love her. Because if Marcus wins today, she'll spend the rest of her life wondering if you knew how much she meant to you." Ray nodded agreement from his position at the radio console. "The girl's right, Jake. Combat makes philosophers of us all, but some truths are simple." Jake picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Emma's number. Around him, the cabin buzzed with preparation for battle, weapons being cleaned, ammunition being counted, defensive positions being finalized. But in this moment, the most important thing was a phone call to his daughter. "Emma," he said when she answered. "It's Dad." "Oh, thank God." Emma's voice carried relief and exhaustion. "I've been so worried." "Where are you?" "I'm in the mountains, sweetheart." "Beautiful country up here." Jake looked out at the pine trees and granite cliffs, memorizing the view in case it was the last peaceful moment he'd ever see. "Dad, you sound different." "Are you okay?" Jake closed his eyes, hearing the concern in his daughter's voice. "I'm fine, Em. I just wanted to call and tell you how proud I am of you. The work you do, the person you've become. Your mother would be so proud. Dad, you're scaring me." "This sounds like goodbye." "Not goodbye," Jake said, watching Sarah check her medical supplies with professional efficiency. "Just making sure you know how much you mean to me. You're the best thing I ever did with my life." The radio crackled with an urgent update. "Charlie 6, hostiles are 15 minutes out. Time to get ready." As Jake hung up with promises to call again soon, he saw Sarah watching him with understanding in her dark eyes. They both knew the odds of survival were poor, but some fights were worth having regardless of the outcome. Sarah's mother's cross necklace caught the morning light as she pressed it to her lips in a moment of silent prayer. The simple silver pendant had been a confirmation gift 18 years ago, when the world still made sense and evil seemed like something that happened to other people. Now it felt like the only thing anchoring her to the person she used to. Jake was positioning early warning, devices around the cabin's perimeter, motion sensors and tripwires connected to Ray's security system. His movements were efficient and purposeful, each sensor placement calculated to provide maximum advance warning of Victor's approach. "There," Jake said, checking the final connection. "We'll know when they're coming long before they reach the cabin." Sarah watched him work with growing admiration for his tactical competence. Even at 62, Jake Morrison moved with the fluid precision of a professional warrior. But she could also see the weight he carried, responsibility for her safety. Grief over Tom Murphy's sacrifice, worry about his daughter Emma. "Jake," she said quietly, "there's something else I need to tell you." He looked up from the security console, noting the change in her voice. After 30 years of reading people under stress, he recognized the tone of someone preparing to reveal a devastating truth. "When I was with Marcus," Sarah continued, her fingers still clutching the cross necklace, "he was controlling about everything. What I ate, where I went, who I talked to, including my medical care." Jake's expression darkened as he began to understand the implications. "I found out 3 weeks ago," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Jake felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the situation. Sarah wasn't just running from an abusive ex-boyfriend or protecting witness testimony. She was carrying the child of a monster, and every day she remained free was another day that child grew inside her. "How far along?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral. "About 4 months," Sarah replied. "I've been trying to figure out what to do. The pregnancy makes me slower, more vulnerable. But I can't let Marcus use this child as leverage." Ray's wheelchair rolled closer as he processed this new information. "Does Marcus know?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "I haven't told anyone until now. But if he captures me, it won't take long for him to figure it out." Jake's mind was already recalculating the tactical situation. A pregnant woman changed everything, increased medical needs, reduced mobility, and most importantly, an additional life to protect. But he could also see something else in Sarah's eyes, a fierce maternal instinct that made her more dangerous, not less. "This child," Sarah said, placing her hand protectively over her still flat stomach, "doesn't deserve to be born into Marcus's world. Doesn't deserve to grow up surrounded by violence and corruption. What do you want to do?" Jake asked. Sarah looked out the window at the mountain peaks, remembering the family photograph she'd carried for 6 months. "I want to give this baby the kind of life I had growing up. Parents who love each other, brothers and sisters to play with, grandparents who spoil them rotten. And Marcus." Sarah's expression hardened with resolve that surprised Jake. Marcus Volkov will never lay a hand on my child. Whatever it takes. The security system chimed with the first motion alert. On the monitor, they could see shadowy figures moving through the tree line 500 yards from the cabin. Victor's advance team was probing their defenses, testing response times and defensive positions. "They're here," Ray announced, rolling to his assigned position near the radio console. Jake handed Sarah a pistol, noting how naturally her fingers found the grip. "You know how to use this?" "My father was a police officer," Sarah replied. "He taught me to shoot when I was 12. As they took their defensive positions, Jake found himself thinking about the strange turns that had brought them to this moment. 24 hours ago, he'd been a retired soldier drinking alone in a roadside bar. Now he was preparing to fight for the life of a woman carrying the child of their enemy. "Sarah," he said, checking his rifle one final time, "after this is over, after we stop Marcus." "What then?" She looked at him with eyes that held both hope and fear. "I don't know. I've been running for so long, I almost forgot what it feels like to plan for a future." The security system showed more movement. Victor's team was establishing positions for a coordinated assault. Professional work that suggested they knew exactly what they were facing. "Well," Jake said with a slight smile, "we'll figure it out together." Sarah touched her cross necklace one more time, then tucked it inside her shirt where it would be safe during the coming battle. The simple gesture somehow felt like preparation for rebirth rather than death. Through the window, they could see Victor himself moving among his men, coordinating the final assault. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight, never failed to complete a mission. But he'd never faced opponents who had more to fight for than money or revenge. "Ray," Jake called, "how long since you've been in a real firefight?" Ray's weathered face split into a grin that would have been terrifying under different circumstances. "Too long, brother. Too damn long." As Victor's forces prepared for their final approach, Sarah felt the child move inside her for the first time, a flutter of life that reminded her exactly what she was fighting for. Not just her own survival, but the future of an innocent soul who deserved better than Marcus Volkov's twisted world. The battle for tomorrow was about to begin. The FBI badge caught the morning sunlight. As Agent Linda Torres held it up for identification, her federal credentials gleaming against the backdrop of pine trees and granite cliffs. She emerged from the forest like a ghost, moving with the practiced stealth of someone trained in tactical operations. "Sarah Chen," Torres called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. "I'm Agent Linda Torres, FBI. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks." Jake's rifle remained trained on the unexpected arrival, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. After 18 hours of expecting an assault by Victor's forces, the appearance of a federal agent felt like another layer of deception in an already complex situation. "How do we know you're really FBI?" Jake called back, noting how Torres moved with military precision despite her civilian clothes. Torres slowly reached into her jacket and withdrew a leather credential case, opening it to display her badge and identification. "Because I'm the only person standing between Sarah and a life sentence for murder." Sarah's face went pale as she processed the agent's words. "Murder? What are you talking about?" "Detective Martinez," Torres replied, stepping closer with her hands visible and non-threatening. "The official investigation concluded that you killed him during a drug deal gone wrong. There's a federal warrant for your arrest." Jake's mind raced through the implications. If Sarah was wanted for Martinez's murder, then her 6 months of running had been about more than just avoiding Marcus's vengeance. She was a fugitive from federal justice, and anyone helping her was technically harboring a wanted criminal. "That's impossible," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I saw Marcus strangle Detective Martinez. I have photographs, documents, evidence of Marcus's crimes." Torres nodded grimly. "Evidence that was mysteriously destroyed in a fire at the FBI field office 3 days after Martinez's death. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Ray wheeled his chair closer to the window, his sniper rifle trained on the tree line where Victor's forces were presumably still positioning for assault. Agent Torres, this is all very interesting, but we've got bigger problems incoming. Actually, Torres said, consulting her watch, Victor Kozlov and his team have been ordered to stand down. New intelligence indicates that Sarah Chen is under federal protection, not federal pursuit. Jake's tactical instinct screamed warnings as he tried to process the rapidly shifting situation. Explain that. Torres opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick file folder. Sarah, you've been in witness protection since the day you fled Seattle. Agent Williams didn't betray you. He placed you in an experimental program designed to protect high-value witnesses by making them appear to be fugitives. Sarah stared at the agent in disbelief. That's insane. Why would you make me run for my life? Because Markus Volkov has corrupted so many law enforcement agencies that traditional witness protection was impossible, Torres explained. By making you appear to be a wanted criminal, we ensured that local police wouldn't try to arrest you and inadvertently deliver you to Marcus's people. Jake studied Torres's credentials more carefully, noting details that suggested authenticity, but something about the timing still felt wrong. If Sarah's been under protection this whole time, where have you been for 6 months? Building a case, Torres replied, using Sarah's flight as bait to draw Marcus's organization into the open. Every move Victor's made, every corrupt official he's contacted, every resource he's expended, we've been documenting everything. The radio crackled with Ray's intelligence network checking in. Charlie 6, this is Phoenix Base. Confirm federal vehicles approaching your position from the south. Looks like cavalry's arriving. Through the window, they could see black SUVs with federal markings moving up the mountain road. But Jake's experience in asymmetric warfare had taught him to be suspicious of anything that seemed too convenient. Agent Torres, Jake said carefully, prove you're really who you say you are. Torres reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a photograph, Sarah working as a volunteer at a homeless shelter in Portland, dated 3 months ago. We've been protecting you from a distance, Sarah, making sure you stayed safe while we built an airtight case against Marcus. Sarah recognized the photograph immediately. She'd volunteered at that shelter for 2 weeks, helping to treat minor injuries and illnesses among the homeless population. At the time, she'd thought no one knew where she was. The nurse practitioner who worked with you, Torres continued, Janet Morrison. She's FBI, Jake's breath caught as he processed the name. Morrison? Your daughter, Emma, Torres said, looking directly at Jake. She's been one of our best undercover assets for 2 years. Social worker was the perfect cover for monitoring Marcus's human trafficking operations. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. His daughter, the social worker he'd been so proud of, the daughter he'd called this morning to say goodbye, was a federal agent working the same case that had consumed his life for the past day. Emma knew, Jake said quietly. She knew I was involved in this, Torres nodded. Emma's been tracking your movements since you left Portland. When you stopped answering her calls, she contacted us. We've been monitoring your communications. Sarah looked between Jake and Torres, trying to understand the connections being revealed. Your daughter has been protecting me? More than that, Torres said. Emma Morrison has been instrumental in mapping Marcus's entire network. The shelters, the social services agencies, the youth programs, all points of contact for identifying trafficking victims. Jake's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Emma. This time, when he answered, her voice carried professional authority instead of personal worry. Dad, Emma said, Agent Torres is legitimate. I'm sorry we couldn't tell you sooner, but operational security required your FBI, Jake interrupted. For 2 years, Emma confirmed. Ever since a trafficking victim died in my arms because I couldn't get her the help she needed in time. Mum's death made me realize how short life is, but that girl's death made me realize how precious life is. Jake felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of everything he thought he knew. His daughter wasn't just a social worker. She was a federal agent who'd chosen to fight the same battles he'd spent 30 years fighting overseas. The testimony Sarah was going to give Torres continued, has already been given. Emma collected everything we needed through her undercover work. Sarah's evidence was confirmation, not the foundation of our case. Then why is Marcus still hunting her? Ray asked from his position at the window. Because he doesn't know, Torres replied. As far as Marcus is concerned, Sarah is still the key witness who can destroy him. Taking her out of play removes what he sees as the primary threat. Sarah processed this information with growing anger. You've been using me as bait for 6 months. Letting me run, letting me live in fear, while you built your case? Yes, Torres admitted without apology. And it worked. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will simultaneously arrest Marcus Volkov and 47 members of his organization across 6 states. The largest human trafficking bust in FBI history. Jake looked at Sarah, seeing the mixture of relief and fury in her eyes. What happens to her now? That depends, Torres said, on whether she wants to testify at trial. Her first-hand account of Detective Martinez's murder would guarantee conviction, but it's not legally necessary anymore. Sarah touched her stomach where their child was growing, thinking about the future she wanted to build. And if I don't testify? New identity, relocation assistance, federal protection until the trials are complete, Torres replied. A chance to disappear completely and start over. As federal vehicles surrounded the cabin and Victor's forces melted away into the forest, Sarah looked at Jake with eyes that held new possibilities. The nightmare was ending, but the question remained, what came after survival? Jake, Sarah said quietly, what do you want to do? Jake thought about Emma, working undercover to fight the same evil that had nearly destroyed Sarah. He thought about Tom Murphy, who died protecting strangers because it was the right thing to do. And he thought about the child Sarah carried, innocent life deserving protection. I want to help you build something better, he said. Torres smiled, seeing the connections forming. Well then, let's start by getting you both somewhere safe. You have a lot to discuss, and tomorrow starts a new chapter for everyone. As they prepared to leave the mountain cabin, Sarah realized that running had finally brought her to the place she was meant to be, not just geographically, but emotionally, ready to stop running and start living. Jake's military medals lay spread across the federal safe-house table like testament to 3 decades of service. Bronze Star with V device. Purple Heart Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. Agent Torres examined each commendation with the respect of someone who understood their significance. Sergeant Major Morrison, Torres said formally, your record speaks for itself. 30 years of distinguished service, multiple combat deployments, exemplary leadership under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unaccustomed to having his military career dissected by federal agents. Beside him, Sarah watched the proceedings with the careful attention of someone whose life hung in the balance of bureaucratic decisions. Agent Torres, Jake said, why does my service record matter to your investigation? Torres closed the file and met his eyes directly. Because Marcus Volkov just escalated beyond anything we anticipated. 2 hours ago, he ordered the assassination of a federal judge, 3 FBI agents, and everyone connected to Sarah's case, including you. The weight of the revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. Through the safe house windows, they could see federal agents positioning themselves in overlapping security patterns, transforming the suburban neighborhood into a fortress. Victor's team didn't stand down, Torres continued. They regrouped and received new orders directly from Marcus. No longer capture Sarah alive, eliminate everyone involved, and destroy all evidence. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where their unborn child seemed suddenly more vulnerable than ever. What changed? Why escalate now? Our planned arrests leaked, Torres admitted grimly. Someone in the federal task force warned Marcus that we were moving tomorrow morning. Now he's implementing a scorched earth strategy. Jake studied the tactical situation with professional eyes. A safe house was defensive by nature, but it also meant they were trapped in a fixed position against an enemy with superior numbers and unlimited resources. "How many agents do you have?" he asked. 12 on site with backup teams 20 minutes out, Torres replied. "But Victor's bringing professional contractors, former Special Forces operatives from 3 different countries. Our intelligence suggests at least 30 hostiles." Ray wheeled his chair closer to the communications console, his weathered hands already adjusting radio frequencies to contact his veteran network. "Jake, my boys are still monitoring the situation. Phoenix Base reports heavy vehicle movement converging on this location." Jake's phone buzzed with a call from Emma. When he answered, her voice carried the controlled urgency of an agent under pressure. "Dad, listen carefully," Emma said. "Marcus knows about the safe house. He's got people inside the federal task force, and they've been feeding him intelligence for weeks." "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe an hour before they're in position for a coordinated assault." "Dad, I'm sorry we couldn't tell you everything sooner, but you did what you had to do," Jake interrupted. "Just like you always have." Torres was already on her radio, coordinating with federal response teams across the region. But Jake could see the strain in her expression. Too many variables, too many ways for the situation to go catastrophically wrong. "Agent Torres," Jake said, "what's the extraction plan?" "Helicopter evacuation from the elementary school 2 miles north," Torres replied. "But we need to hold this position until air support arrives." Jake examined the safe house layout with tactical eyes. Suburban construction, multiple windows, limited cover, too many approach routes for a determined assault team. It was a tactical nightmare. "This place is a death trap," he said bluntly. "We need to move to better defensive positions." "Where?" Torres asked. "Marcus has resources everywhere. Police departments, sheriff's offices, even some federal agencies. Nowhere is completely secure." Sarah looked up from the medical supplies she'd been organizing, her nursing training automatically preparing for casualties. "What about the elementary school?" "If it's our extraction point anyway," Jake considered the suggestion. Schools were built with security in mind these days. Controlled access points, reinforced construction, open fields of fire around the perimeter. "It might work." "Ray," Jake called, "what's the terrain like around Lincoln Elementary?" Ray consulted his topographical maps with the expertise of someone who'd spent 40 years studying defensive positions. "Open ground on 3 sides, single access road, good sightlines." "Better than here," Torres shook her head. "Moving positions exposes us during transit. Victor's people could hit us on the road. They're going to hit us anyway," Jake pointed out. "At least at the school, we choose the ground." Through the window, they could see unmarked vehicles beginning to appear in the neighborhood. Plumbing trucks, cable repair vans, landscaping crews. All the mundane cover identities that professional surveillance teams used to establish overwatch positions. "They're already here," Sarah said quietly, recognizing the pattern from 6 months of being hunted. Torres made the decision with the authority of someone trained to operate under pressure. "We move in 10 minutes. Full tactical convoy to the elementary school." As federal agents prepared vehicles and equipment for emergency relocation, Jake felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but he'd faced worse odds overseas. "Sarah," he said, checking his sidearm one final time, "stay close to me. Whatever happens, we get you and the baby out of this alive." Sarah nodded, her hands still resting protectively over her stomach. "What about Agent Torres and her team?" Jake looked at the federal agents preparing for battle, young men and women who'd sworn the same oath he'd taken 30 years ago. "We get everyone out alive." The sound of helicopters approaching from the south meant their window for movement was closing rapidly. Victor's assault was about to begin, and the final battle for Sarah's freedom was only minutes away. Ray's combat knife gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as he pressed it into Jake's hand with the solemnity of a sacred ritual. The Vietnam-era weapon had been passed between brothers in arms for over 40 years. Its worn grip smoothed by countless hands that had faced death and emerged victorious. "This blade has seen more battles than most soldiers," Ray said quietly. Carried it through 2 tours in Vietnam, gave it to my squad leader when I rotated home. He passed it to his son before Iraq, who gave it to his battle buddy before Afghanistan. Jake tested the weight of the knife, feeling the perfect balance that only came from decades of careful maintenance. The steel was Damascus, forged by a master craftsman who understood that a warrior's blade was more than just a tool. It was a covenant with survival. "Ray, I can't take this," Jake protested. "You're not taking it," Ray replied firmly. "You're carrying it forward. That knife has never failed to bring its bearer home alive. Today, it's going to bring you and Sarah home safe." Through the elementary school's reinforced windows, they could see Victor's forces establishing positions in the surrounding neighborhood. Professional work. Sniper teams on rooftops, assault squads in abandoned buildings, technical support vehicles disguised as municipal maintenance trucks. Agent Torres coordinated federal response teams over encrypted radio channels, her voice carrying the controlled urgency of someone managing a deteriorating tactical situation. "Eagle 1, confirm your position. We need overwatch on the southern approach." Sarah sat in the school nurse's office, methodically organizing medical supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd treated trauma victims under fire. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but Jake could see the strain in her eyes as she processed the scope of forces arrayed against them. "How are you holding up?" Jake asked, settling beside her. "I keep thinking about the children who usually sit at these desks," Sarah replied, looking around the empty classroom. "Tomorrow morning this should be filled with kids learning arithmetic and reading stories. Instead, it's going to be a battlefield." Jake followed her gaze to the colorful alphabet charts and motivational posters that decorated the walls. Someone had written "Be kind" in cheerful letters above the chalkboard, a simple message that seemed profoundly important given the violence about to unfold. "After this is over," Jake said, "those kids will come back. They'll learn and grow and become whatever they want to be. That's what we're fighting for." Sarah touched her stomach where their child was growing, thinking about the future she wanted to create. "I used to believe that good always triumphed over evil. Working in the trauma ward, I saw so much senseless violence that I started to wonder if I was naive." "You weren't naive," Jake said. "You were hopeful." "There's a difference." Ray's wheelchair approached their position, his sniper rifle balanced across his lap like an extension of his body. Despite his disability, he moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of war. "Jake," Ray said, "Victor's people are in position. Professional setup. They're going to hit us from 3 directions simultaneously." Jake studied the tactical display that Torres had set up on the school's smartboard. Red markers indicated enemy positions, blue markers showed federal defensive positions, and green markers tracked civilian evacuation routes. "They're trying to box us in," Jake observed. "Force us into a fixed defensive position where their superior numbers give them the advantage." "Exactly what I'd do," Ray agreed. "Question is, do we let them dictate the terms of engagement?" Torres approached their planning session with fresh intelligence from her field teams. "We've got a problem. Victor's not just planning to kill Sarah, he's planning to destroy this entire neighborhood, to eliminate witnesses." Jake's blood chilled as he processed the implications. "What kind of ordnance are we talking about?" "Fuel-air explosives," Torres replied grimly. "Enough to level 6 city blocks and make it look like a gas leak explosion. Anyone who might have seen anything, heard anything, or learned anything disappears in one coordinated event." Sarah stared at the tactical display with growing horror. "He's going to kill innocent families just to cover his tracks." "That's who Marcus Volkov is," Torres said. "He doesn't just eliminate threats, he eliminates entire categories of potential threats." Jake's mind shifted into the tactical mode that had kept his soldiers alive through countless combat operations. The rules of engagement had just changed fundamentally. This wasn't about protecting Sarah anymore. It was about preventing a massacre. "How long until detonation?" he asked. "Unknown," Torres replied. "Victor's team has been methodically placing charges throughout the neighborhood. Could be minutes, could be hours. Ray checked his watch, calculating timing and distances with the precision of someone who'd coordinated artillery strikes under enemy fire. If we're going to move, it has to be now. Every minute we wait gives them more time to tighten the noose. Jake looked at Sarah, seeing the determination in her eyes that had carried her through 6 months of running. She was no longer just a victim seeking protection. She was a woman preparing to fight for the innocent lives that Marcus threatened. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "Stay alive," Jake replied. "Whatever happens in the next hour, you and that baby represent hope for a better future. Don't let Marcus take that away from the world." Sarah nodded, understanding that some battles were larger than personal survival. The child she carried would grow up in whatever world emerged from today's violence. "Agent Torres," Jake said, "what's our extraction timeline?" "Helicopter support in 40 minutes, Torres replied. "If we can hold our positions that long." Jake gripped Ray's combat knife, feeling the weight of 40 years of Brotherhood flowing through the worn steel. Around them, federal agents prepared for the fight of their lives, while somewhere in the neighborhood, innocent families went about their daily routines, unaware that death was closing in. The final battle was about to begin, and everything they'd fought for hung in the balance of the next few minutes. Marcus Volkov's gold watch caught the afternoon sunlight as he stepped out of his armored Mercedes. The expensive timepiece, a trophy taken from a federal judge who'd refused to accept his bribes. The watch had belonged to the judge's grandfather, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations before Marcus claimed it as a symbol of his power over the American justice system. Victor approached his employer with the deferential posture of someone who understood that Marcus's calm exterior concealed volcanic rage. Behind them, 30 professional contractors took final positions around Lincoln Elementary School. Their movements coordinated with military precision. "Report," Marcus said quietly, his accented English carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "All charges are in place," Victor replied. 6 buildings wired with fuel-air explosives. When detonated, the entire neighborhood will appear to have suffered catastrophic gas leak explosions. Marcus nodded approvingly as he surveyed the suburban landscape that would soon become a crematorium. Children's bicycles sat abandoned in driveways. Halloween decorations hung from porch railings. And somewhere inside those peaceful homes, families were preparing dinner without knowing they had minutes to live. "And Sarah Chen?" Marcus asked. "Trapped in the elementary school with federal agents and the old soldier," Victor reported. "No escape routes remain open." Marcus's smile held no warmth as he thought about the woman who'd cost him months of careful planning and millions of dollars in lost revenue. Sarah Chen had seen too much, knew too much, and worst of all, had dared to run from him when he'd offered her a privileged position in his organization. Inside the school, Jake pressed his eye to the rifle scope, watching Marcus's arrival through a classroom window. The Russian moved with the arrogant confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. But Jake could see tactical vulnerabilities in his positioning. "I count 30 hostiles," Jake reported to Torres over their radio link. "Professional contractors, military-grade weapons, a coordinated assault formation." Ray's wheelchair was positioned near the school's main entrance, his sniper rifle trained on the parking lot where Marcus stood exposed. Despite his disability, Ray maintained the steady hands of someone who'd made impossible shots under enemy fire. "I can take Marcus from here," Ray said quietly. "Clean shot, center mass." "End this whole thing right now." "Negative," Jake replied. "We need him alive to testify about his network. Besides, killing him doesn't stop the explosives from detonating." Sarah monitored their radio communications from the nurse's office, her medical supplies organized for mass casualty treatment. Through the window, she could see children's playground equipment, swings and slides that should have been filled with laughter instead of serving as cover for snipers. "Jake," Sarah called over the radio, "how many innocent people are in the blast radius?" Torres consulted her evacuation charts with growing desperation. We managed to evacuate 2 blocks, but Marcus's people are preventing emergency services from reaching the other 4 blocks. Estimate 300 civilians still in the target area. The weight of those numbers settled over Jake like a physical burden. 300 innocent lives, children, parents, grandparents, who would die if Victor's explosives detonated. The tactical situation had evolved beyond protecting Sarah into preventing mass murder. "Agent Torres," Jake said, "we need to locate and disarm those charges." "Impossible," Torres replied. "Victor's team is trained in explosive ordnance disposal. They've hidden the devices and are prepared to detonate remotely if we attempt interference." Through his scope, Jake watched Marcus checking his gold watch with theatrical patience. The Russian was savoring this moment, the culmination of 6 months spent hunting Sarah across 3 states. Victor's voice crackled over intercepted radio frequencies. "All teams report ready. Initiate assault in 60 seconds. Jake's mind shifted into the tactical mode that had kept him alive through 30 years of combat operations. The enemy had superior numbers, better positioning, and overwhelming firepower. But they also had something Jake could exploit: arrogance. "Ray," Jake said, "when I give the signal, put a round through Marcus's left shoulder. Wound him, don't kill him." "Copy that," Ray replied, adjusting his scope for the precise shot. Sarah's voice came over the radio with professional calm. "I'm ready for casualties. Whatever happens, I can keep people alive long enough for evacuation." Jake thought about Emma, working undercover somewhere in the city, and about the unborn child Sarah carried, innocent life deserving protection from Marcus's violence. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the odds. "Torres," Jake said, "when this starts, your priority is getting Sarah to the extraction point. Don't worry about anything else." "What about you?" Torres asked. Jake checked Ray's combat knife one final time, feeling the weight of 40 years of Brotherhood in the worn steel. "I'm going to give Victor and his team something they weren't expecting." Marcus raised his hand, preparing to signal the assault that would eliminate everyone who threatened his criminal empire. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. Jake Morrison wasn't just another target to be eliminated. He was a warrior who'd spent 3 decades learning how to turn impossible odds into victory. "All stations," Jake said into his radio. "Execute." Ray's rifle cracked once, the precision shot spinning Marcus around and dropping him to the asphalt. As Victor's forces rushed to protect their wounded leader, Jake burst through the school's rear exit, using the chaos to begin his assault on the enemy's flank. The final battle had begun, and the fate of 300 innocent lives hung in the balance of the next few minutes. Sarah's engagement ring sailed through the air in a perfect arc, the diamond catching afternoon sunlight one final time before disappearing into the school's storm drain. The ring had been Marcus's first attempt to claim ownership of her life, a beautiful cage disguised as a symbol of love. Throwing it away felt like shedding the last chain that bound her to her. Nightmare. Jake moved through the suburban battlefield with the fluid precision of someone who'd perfected urban warfare in the streets of Fallujah and Kandahar. Victor's contractors were professionals, but they'd been trained to fight enemies who followed conventional rules. Jake Morrison had spent 30 years learning to win fights that couldn't be won. The first explosive device sat concealed beneath a children's playground, its timer counting down toward mass destruction. Jake approached it with Ray's combat knife in hand, using the blade to carefully probe the device's construction. Fuel-air explosives were notoriously sensitive. One wrong move would detonate enough ordnance to level 3 city blocks. "Torres," Jake called over his radio, "I found the first device. It's more sophisticated than expected." Agent Torres's voice crackled back through heavy static. "Can you disarm it?" Jake studied the device's timer mechanism, noting the professional-grade construction that suggested military expertise. "Not without an EOD specialist. This thing is designed to prevent tampering. Through his earpiece, he could hear the ongoing firefight as federal agents engaged Victor's assault teams around the school's perimeter. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with medical authority. "I need immediate evacuation for Agent Martinez. Gunshot wound to the chest, arterial bleeding." The irony wasn't lost on Jake, another Agent Martinez fighting the same battle that had killed Detective Martinez 6 months ago. Marcus's reach extended so far that even names seemed to repeat in an endless cycle of violence. Victor's voice echoed across the playground as he coordinated his forces. "Find Morrison! He's disrupting our timeline." Jake smiled grimly as he moved toward the second explosive device, hidden beneath a residential porch where a family of 4 was sheltering in their basement. The tactical situation was desperate, but desperation had always been his specialty. The second device was identical to the first, military-grade construction with anti-tampering mechanisms that would trigger detonation if disturbed. But Jake noticed something Victor's team had missed, a small manufacturing flaw in the timer housing that created a vulnerability. Using Ray's knife with surgical precision, Jake exploited the flaw to access the device's internal wiring. His hands moved with the steady confidence of someone who'd disarmed countless improvised explosive devices during his deployments. Overseas, Sarah's medical training proved invaluable as she coordinated casualty treatment. From the school's nurse station, "Agent Torres, I need you to apply direct pressure to that wound while I prepare the IV. We're not losing anyone today." The determination in her voice reminded Jake why he'd committed to protecting her. Sarah Chen wasn't just a victim seeking salvation. She was a healer who refused to let evil triumph over innocent life. Victor appeared at the far end of the playground, his weapon trained on Jake's position. "Morrison! Step away from the device," Jake continued working, his fingers tracing wires with delicate precision. "Can't do that, Victor. Too many innocent people are going to die if these things detonate." "Those people mean nothing," Victor replied coldly. "They are acceptable casualties in a larger war." "That's where you're wrong," Jake said, finding the device's primary power source. "Every life matters. That's what separates us from people like Marcus." Victor's finger tightened on his trigger, but a shot from Ray's sniper position sent him diving for cover behind a swing set. The old Marine's accuracy hadn't diminished, despite his disability. The round had missed Victor by inches, exactly as intended. "Thanks." "Ray," Jake called over the radio. "Any time, brother," Ray replied. "How many more devices?" Jake consulted his mental map of the neighborhood, estimating positions based on Victor's tactical deployment. 4 more minimum, and the timers are synchronized. They all detonate simultaneously. Sarah's voice cut through their conversation with urgent medical updates. "Federal air support inbound, ETA 5 minutes. But we have 3 agents down and need immediate evacuation." The helicopter extraction was their only hope for survival. But Jake realized he couldn't reach all the remaining devices before the synchronized detonation. The tactical mathematics were brutal. Save Sarah and let 300 civilians die, or attempt to save everyone and probably lose them all. Marcus's voice echoed across the battlefield as medics treated his shoulder wound. "Victor! Detonate everything now." "I don't care about the timeline." "Negative," Victor replied. "Morrison is too close to the devices. Premature detonation could disrupt the chain reaction." Jake seized on that information, understanding Victor's weakness. The devices were designed to detonate in sequence, each explosion triggering the next. But if he could disrupt the sequence— "Torres," Jake called, "I need you to get Sarah to the extraction point." "Don't wait for me." "Jake, what are you planning?" Sarah's voice carried fear and desperation. Jake looked at Ray's combat knife, thinking about the 40 years of Brotherhood it represented. "Something your Russian friends won't expect." As federal helicopters approached from the south, Jake began moving toward the central device that controlled the entire detonation sequence. If he could disable the master timer, the other devices would become harmless. But reaching it meant crossing open ground under enemy fire. "Sarah," Jake said over the radio, "whatever happens, remember that some things are worth fighting for. The final moments of the battle were approaching, and Jake Morrison was about to discover whether a lifetime of military service had prepared him for the ultimate sacrifice. The simple engagement ring caught the morning light as Jake placed it in Sarah's palm. The modest diamond, a stark contrast to the gaudy symbol of possession Marcus had forced upon her. This ring spoke of choice rather than ownership, of partnership rather than dominance, of a future built on mutual respect rather than fear. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, her voice still hoarse from the smoke and chaos of the previous day's battle. Around them, the federal medical facility hummed with quiet efficiency as doctors treated the wounded and counselors helped survivors process their trauma. Jake's left arm remained in a sling from the shrapnel wound he'd sustained while disabling the final explosive device. But his eyes held a peace that had been absent since Linda's death 2 years ago. "I know it's not much compared to what you're used to." Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit, despite Jake having no opportunity to measure. "It's everything I wanted and never knew I needed." Through the hospital window, they could see Ray wheeling himself across the parking lot, his purple heart gleaming on his chest as he prepared to testify before the federal grand jury. Victor's capture had broken the back of Marcus's organization, but the legal process would take months to completely dismantle the criminal network. "Marcus?" Sarah asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Federal custody," Jake replied. "Multiple life sentences, no possibility of parole. His lawyers are already discussing plea bargains, but Torres says the evidence is overwhelming." Emma appeared in the doorway, her FBI credentials visible, but her expression purely that of a concerned daughter. The revelation of her undercover work had initially shocked Jake, but he'd come to understand that Emma had inherited his commitment to protecting the innocent. "How are you feeling?" Emma asked Sarah, settling into the visitor's chair with the gentle competence of someone trained in trauma counseling. "Like I can finally breathe again," Sarah replied honestly. "For 6 months I've been running from shadows. Now the shadows have names and faces and prison sentences." Jake watched his daughter interact with the woman he'd chosen to build a life with, seeing the natural rapport that suggested family harmony in their future. Emma had already offered to help with the baby's care, joking that she needed practice before having children of her own. "Dad," Emma said, "I've been thinking about names for the baby." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and genuine for the first time since Jake had known her. "We don't even know if it's a boy or girl yet." "Doesn't matter," Emma replied with mock seriousness. "I have suggestions for both." Agent Torres knocked on the doorframe, her professional demeanor softened by obvious relief at the successful outcome. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have some paperwork for Sarah to sign. New identity documents, relocation assistance, the full witness protection package." Sarah looked at the documents, then at Jake, then back at Torres. "Actually, Agent Torres, I don't think I'll be needing those." Jake's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Sarah, are you sure?" "A new start might be—" "I want to keep my name," Sarah interrupted gently. "Sarah Chen survived Marcus Volkov. Sarah Chen helped bring down a criminal organization. Sarah Chen chose love over fear. I'm proud of who that person is." Torres nodded approvingly. "The offer remains open if you change your mind, but I understand wanting to reclaim your identity." As the FBI agent left them alone, Jake took Sarah's hand, feeling the new ring beneath his fingers. "So what happens now?" Sarah placed her other hand over her growing belly, thinking about the child who would grow up free from Marcus's shadow. "Now we build something beautiful together. Something worth all the fighting we've done to get here." Outside the window, life continued its eternal rhythm, people working, children playing, families gathering for Sunday dinner. The same ordinary miracles that Jake had spent 30 years protecting in places most people would never see. "I love you." "Sarah Chen," Jake said quietly. "I love you too." "Jake Morrison," she replied, and for the first time in months, the future looked bright with possibility. The wedding photograph captured a moment of pure joy, Jake and Sarah standing before the rebuilt Murphy's bar, surrounded by the family of warriors who'd helped them survive their darkest hour. Tom Murphy's nephew had reopened the bar as a community centre for veterans and trauma survivors, honouring his uncle's memory while creating something positive from tragedy. 6 months had passed since the final confrontation with Marcus Volkov. Sarah's pregnancy was progressing beautifully, and Jake had discovered that impending fatherhood at 62 brought unexpected energy rather than exhaustion. Emma stood beside them in the photograph, her hand resting protectively on Sarah's growing belly. Already embracing her role as protective big sister, Ray had recovered from his wounds and found new purpose coordinating support services for disabled veterans across 3 states. His combat knife had been retired to a place of honor above the bar's rebuilt fireplace, a reminder that some weapons were meant to protect rather than destroy. The simple ceremony had been perfect. No elaborate decorations or expensive catering, just people who mattered sharing a moment of celebration. Agent Torres had officiated, using her authority as a federal agent to perform the marriage ceremony in Murphy's renovated community room. "What do you think Tom would say if he could see this?" Sarah asked, studying the photograph of their unlikely family. Jake smiled, remembering the gruff Marine who'd sacrificed everything to protect strangers. "He'd probably complain about us getting sentimental." Sarah laughed, her hand moving to the cross necklace she still wore, a symbol of faith that had carried her through the darkest period of her life. "I think he'd be proud of what we've built here." The community center buzzed with activity as veterans shared stories. Families received counseling, and survivors found support among people who understood their struggles. What had begun as a refuge for lost souls had evolved into a beacon of hope for anyone seeking healing. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Baby Morrison is going to be so loved." As evening settled over the mountains, Jake and Sarah stood on the porch of their new home, a modest house near the community center where they could continue helping others while building their own family. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and grounded in the hard-won knowledge that love could triumph over even the darkest evil. Sarah's nursing skills had found new purpose in trauma counseling, while Jake's military experience proved invaluable in teaching survival skills and self-defense to vulnerable populations. Together, they were creating the kind of life worth fighting for. "No more running?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "No more running," Sarah confirmed, settling into his arms as their unborn child moved gently within her. "Just living." In the distance, the rebuilt neon sign of Murphy's Community Center flickered against the gathering darkness, casting the same red glow that had guided them to safety on that fateful night. But now, the light represented hope rather than desperation, community rather than isolation, and a future built on the foundation of love, conquering fear.